We're in the dead of winter, and we're outpacing the spring market of the hottest year in the recorded history of Toronto real estate, 2017. We make it look like nothing, and we're just in February. Good morning, investors. Bradley here from Watson Estates, and you're listening to the largest and fastest growing podcast for Toronto real estate on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Toronto real estate has hit the highest percentage sold over asking in history. As the numbers continue to grow, where is it going to end? Today, we're going to talk about some of the factors that have played into this and where 2022 is headed. The numbers look good for now. And obviously, we just come through Valentine's Day. I hope you guys enjoyed your time and had a chance to show your sweetie and or your podcast fans how much you love them. But if you aren't in love on Valentine's Day, that's okay. Don't worry. You don't have to be dead on Halloween either. It works out for everyone. There's nothing wrong with spending Valentine's Day like the Star Wars fans out there. Solo. We like to have some fun in the show. As an investor and broker myself, I want to know what's going on, and that's precisely what this podcast is all about, sharing with you what I'm learning as we go and try and decipher and understand what's happening in the market. Please support the show. Hit the like button in this video. Leave a comment if there's anything you got to say. And as well, you can, if you locate our link tree, you can find out some more info on some joint venture opportunities we have, different off-market deals, as well as coaching, lots of goodies, lots of things for my sweeties. And in this case, that is you guys, the fans. I truly appreciate the time and energy you put into attending our show and listening and collecting facts and ultimately making your own investment decisions. And so today we're going to start off just to give you a little bit of high level where we're going to go. We're going to start talking about the market, give you a bit of an update, even as far as what's happening in the last couple of weeks. And from there, we're going to talk about some of the issues on the table, what kind of things have been passed, and where do we go from here? What happens next? So we're going to start off. We just got info from the Canadian market, from the Canadian Real Estate Association on what exactly is going on across the country from coast to coast. Well, it's not just Toronto that's hot, hot, hot. It's also our great nation. Average house prices have hit $748,450 in January, so just under $750K, which is up 21% in the past year. Unbelievable. The Canadian Real Estate Association, which represents more than 100,000 realtors, myself included, from coast to coast, said Tuesday that the volume of homes that have sold has plateaued, largely because of lack of inventory. So what I'm hearing is if there was more opportunities, more properties to purchase, we would have gobbled those up. But because of the amount of inventory we have on the market, it's led to a slowdown in the number of sales activity. But prices continue all the while to record-setting ascent. Guys, reminder, we're in February. The winter is supposed to be slow. That is normal. But when we look at the number of sales, January 2021 was the busiest January for home sales on record, and 2020 was the second busiest. So apart from the fact that we can't find anything, we are trailing just behind the highest sales year ever in January. Well, when we look at the HPI, which accounts for the different housing types, we also see that the housing price overall is one factor. But even when we dive specific into your units, the HPI is also up. It's up 2.9% in January alone. In 1 month alone across Canada, you've experienced almost a 3% increase in your property value. And on an annual basis, it's up 28%. That's the highest it's ever been, if you didn't already know. But that number gets more skewed when we jump into our favorite markets over here in Ontario as well as BC. They're some of the biggest factors that lead to that increase. Some of the markets have clocked 30% gains in the past year. We're going to share some of those markets later in our show as well, and what exactly they're doing to address it or their perspectives on it. We're going to have some good chats today. But in contrast, when we look out in the prairies, where prices have increased by about 10% compared to 30%, we're talking as well in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, that's since last January, which has led a lot of investors, even I'm seeing in my circles, to, in some cases, pull out of Ontario, but definitely to dive deep into these provinces with their investment dollars as they see an opportunity potentially opening up. But the ideal situation, according to the Canadian Real Estate Association, to deal with this between now and the summer would be that a huge surge of sellers come forward looking to sell. The funny thing is we have this balance of supply and demand. We're going to talk about some of those things today. But at the end of the day, as it relates to our immediate situation, we don't have sellers. Is there a way to encourage or boost sellers to sell? Because the ideal situation, according to Korea, would be to have more sellers move forward. The game of chicken, as I like to call it, between buyers and sellers continues. Quote, this is what they say. If that were to occur, similar to 2021, we'd likely see a massive number of sales take place, which would get a lot of frustrated buyers into home ownership. And we'd likely see some cooling off on the price growth side. In other words, there is plenty of demand available, ready to gobble up those listings. The ones that are holding the tightest is the sellers. When you're increasing your property value across the country by 3% a month, how quick are you to sell? We're going to talk a little bit about that. But I love this next article that comes from the Globe and Mail. And when they dive a little deeper, they look at new listings. The new listings have dropped from December to January. So what's available in the last month by 11%. That maybe explains why Canada is so hot. And they asked BMO's senior economist, Robert Kavchich, what he had to say about this. This is what he says. There are expectations that home prices will keep rising quickly. This pulls more investors into the market, those hated investors. You guys suck, right? The problem is the investors right now in a lot of people's minds. But why are they doing it? Because of these scenarios. It creates an urgency among potential buyers, he says, and probably holds back listings as well. And this is my favorite quote from today. He says this, why sell today when you can get 10% more tomorrow? I love that. Describes the FOMO as well as the mindset behind sellers. Yeah, I can't find something to buy, but look at how well I'm doing as well. Why go anywhere? Our beloved Toronto homeowners are being treated like royalty right now, but like any good princess knows, your Paris traffic accident is coming. Not funny. Not funny. Come on now. But God, I hope interest rates will slow this climbing that's happening, right? Well, the article finishes, the Bank of Canada is expected to start raising interest rates in March. Be interesting to see how much. The U.S. is talking about 0.5% now. In all likelihood, will we follow? Only time will tell. But they say, which will make it more expensive for homeowners to buy, right? To borrow. But that is not expected to dissuade buyers, according to Korea. Damn it! That's not going to be enough. Are you serious? But no doubt the delay in increasing the interest rates is what's caused our February hot market, where the Toronto Real Estate Board sees things slowing down from here on out. February, because of the delay in the interest rate, has actually experienced astronomical price growth. And that fund will continue. According to Korea, even an interest rate hike won't interfere, but I tend to think differently. That's ultimately up to you guys, and we're going to track that along the way. But we have to dive deeper into the stats for our beloved little city called Toronto. We're going to look at the 416 condos to start. These are weekly, by the way. These are very updated. You're not going to see this in the January stats, but it's reflective of where we're headed for this month. Both the percentage sold over asking and the percentage sold 20% over asking are higher than the peak they were in 2017. If you guys remember, 2017 was that hot. It's when the B20 stress test rolled in and everything came crashing down. The party ended. Well, we beat those numbers when it comes to 416 condos and growing. If you think about it, listen to this. How many condos in the 416 last week sold over asking? 77%. And 27% of which sold 20% over asking. So they're doing very, very well. When we jump over to the 416 freehold side, we see much of the same. Slightly off the 2017 high, we sit right now at 84% of properties selling over asking. And get this, unbelievable numbers. We have 53% sold 20% over asking. So over half of Toronto's freehold homes that sold last week went 20% or more over asking. I'd call that a hot market, despite us being in the middle of February. Well, the good news, if we're going to have any good news for the potential future buyers in our market, would be that we have an increase in inventory for both freehold and condos. That's nice to see, but it's overshadowed by a month of inventory currently for freehold at 1.0 and condos, the lowest that I've ever seen in my career at 0.7%. That's just crazy. 0.7 months, of inventory. So both categories in the 416 are 1% or less. So no wonder we have so many offers, so many prices going over asking. We're in the dead of winter and we're outpacing the spring market of the hottest year in the recorded history of Toronto real estate, 2017. We make it look like nothing, and we're just in February. Is it maybe the spring market pulling forward because of the anticipated interest rate hike? Some people believe that, but all that to say, maybe this year is at best an early spring market. At worst, only going to get worse. And when we look at the rental market, it's actually holding steady. We've seen this over the last several months. We see what seems like balance in the rental market, which is a nice change of pace compared to what's going on for house prices. There's something beautiful about that. We're just kind of clamping on to anything we can. If it's enough for Einstein to love his parents and grandparents, it's enough for me because they were all relatives. Oh, sorry. That was a bad joke. I'm just trying to appreciate the little things this Valentine's Day. Like, I love the way the earth rotates. Makes my day. So, speaking of earth rotating, ahead of us is the rest of 2022. In this godforsaken planet, we're going to talk about the forecast for this little country called Canada and what that looks like, starting with the Globe and Mail. We're all trying to figure this out, myself included. But what we can do is we can lean in on a lot of ways on economists who definitely have it figured out, as we've seen through COVID. But Benjamin Tall is going to put his neck on the line and forecast a strong spring market in Canadian real estate, and with it, an even larger presence in the what they call bank of mom and dad. And here's what he says, quote, "You basically see people trying to get into the market before it's too late." Speaking to this fact that interest rates are going to go up, lock in those good rates. But when we look at the share of parent gifts, the share of first-time buyer receiving help from parents has climbed steadily to about 30% at the end of the third quarter last year from about 19% in 2015. So we see the share of first-time buyers, of even move-up buyers, growing in the last several years. Well, the size of those gifts as well are growing. The size of the average gift has jumped another $10,000 by January from the $82,000 earlier in the fall. Just very quickly, we see this number growing, obviously, to keep pace with the price growth. In a market as richly priced as Toronto, that gift was more likely to be in the $130,000 range last year. So those numbers were looking Canada-wide, but when we focus in again in Toronto, or in some of these larger, more heated markets, it's actually more. It's even more money coming from these rich mom and dads who are ultimately screwing our market. Screw you, Dad. But imagine if they restricted how parents can transfer money to their kids. Does that mean we solve the problem by cutting that off or adding serious restrictions? Well, probably not. Don't think that would go over too well politically. So unfortunately, many people don't have this opportunity, right? And we'll get into the podcast later about what they can do. I want to get into how do you get into a crazy and hot housing market, kind of as a touch point before we end the show. But that's the difference. We see the rich and the inheritance passing along and continuing to grow and have families growing, while all the while we have families who don't have those opportunities. I know when I bought my first house, I didn't have a gimme. There was no opportunity there for us to get into the housing market. And so that separation as the housing market grows continues to grow, in fact, exponentially, because mom and dad are just making it worse for the other kids in school. Which leads me to my next great quote that perfectly illustrates the FOMO. Here's what they say. This is, I believe, Benjamin Tall. Quote, "If you don't buy this one, the next one is going to cost more." Actually, that's not Benjamin Tall. That's talking to realtors. And this image that they see out there with parents kind of intervening in these multiple offer presentation times, and they're really sticking their nose in and just backing up their kids, making this very unfair advantage at the bidding war presentation. Parents don't only support the down payment. This is a note that I added, but they're also a massive safety net, right? When we're going into multiple offer situations and we're cutting things like financing, unknowing if the appraisal is going to meet us on the other side in a nice way, or if we're going to need to add more money, having a support system financially is also huge, even if a down payment isn't there. Think about somebody who is buying a home for the first time and needs to get the right price because all they have is 20% down, versus a family that has 20% down, but you know what? Maybe we'll pay a little bit more because at the end of the day, we know house prices are doing the way they are. That is FOMO at its finest. With over asking offers, an appraisal can screw you hard, and having deep pockets makes all the difference, aka mom and dad. And the mindset then is there's nothing wrong with overpaying if you have the money. Here's a quote from the article. The adult children receiving the money are willing to pay more than market value in order to be in the neighborhood. Maybe they want to be close to that, prestigious private school. They want to be in that zone. Quote, it's family money that's being passed down to them. It's hard to compete with people like this. They're willing to pay a premium because they've got the family backing, but the party does end eventually. According to Mr. Tall at CIBC, warns that older generations should be cautious about being too generous with their gifts, whether they're holding onto cash, signing as a guarantor on a mortgage, or buying an investment condo for a young child's future. He believes the current burst of activity in the housing market is partly a result of demand being pulled forward, a lot of which is from the interest rates. Quote, we are borrowing activity from the future, and the future will arrive. Where do we head from here? There's a lot of flashing red lights, a lot of media talking about bubble. It's such an easy conversation to have. Well, interest rates, though we heard in another argument from Korea that it wouldn't have an impact, I do believe that it will. It will either help or hurt. Put it that way. Benjamin Tall notes that economic downturns in 1990 and in 2008 were triggered by central bankers raising rates too quickly. So we're here, we're excited about an interest rate hike and how it could really, slow the market down, or at least create some level playing field and just allow people some breathing room. All the while, if the central bank decides that this is an opportunity to raise rates overly quick or too fast, it could actually have a big problem. We could have a big situation, and then you've got a property you're closing on without parent support in the next few months. Just be careful, guys, parents included. Watch yourself. And then, as well, we have this race right now for affordability. And condos can act as a hedge. We're going to talk about this, maybe a new concept for you, but something that I think, just as I've thought it through, is actually quite smart with the coming towards us of interest rates about to rise. Maybe condos is a safe haven for a lot of people. Here's where we're getting this from. Zoocasa, an online brokerage, says the spread between high and low-rise housing is the second largest it has ever been. Comparing both segment prices in Toronto between 2011 and 2021, condos cost half of what detached houses did. According to the report, and we've looked at this before. This isn't new information, but it's interesting. It's coming from Zoocasa and it's becoming more widely known. According to the report, the ratio has increased from 1.99 to 2.33 and hasn't been this high since the B20 mortgage stress test was introduced in January 2017, months before Ontario introduced a foreign buyer tax levy of 15% to subdue rising prices and price appreciation for GTA houses. So here's what they say, quote, taking cues from 2018, when interest rates rose last, we can predict that the most affordable price points in the market, like condos and townhouses, will lead growth in 2022 as a result of higher borrowing costs. So what we've seen in history, in the recent history as well, when you have the ability to borrow, for example, a stress test or a rising interest rate, makes it harder for people to qualify. We see an adjustment where the market tends to favor the condos and the townhomes, those that are more affordable, these units, especially in an environment when the ratio is off the charts, leaning in favor of freeholds, are just too expensive relative to the normal balance we experience in the GTA between condos and freeholds. In other words, condos are an interest rate hike hedge. So as interest rates rise, being in a condo seems to be a better hedge against any price fall that could happen. Take that information however you will. I mean, we're talking in the next few weeks about a rate hike, and obviously real estate moves a little bit slower, but for those of you who are condo owners that are holding on to my words as far as we believe 2022 will be a year of the condo, that is part of it. That's part of it that's been built in there. So we're going to talk now about demand and supply. You're going to learn some stuff, but the first big news is that the immigration pie is about to get a whole lot larger. That's right. As Canadians, we happily encourage our neighbors to come, right? That's the saying. Love thy neighbor. Unless you live next to a brothel. Better not. But then we're going to jump into the Star. The Star is going to tell us a little bit about some of the updates that's come out of Immigration Minister Sean Fraser's mouth. Canada plans to welcome more than 1.3 million new immigrants to the country over the next 3 years to help its economic recovery from COVID-19 and to drive future growth. These numbers, which have been high, it seems like the government had buckled down. We're going to go harder on immigration during COVID. that's progressing. It's not like we've reached a number that we like and we're staying there. We're actually moving forward. 2021's goal was 405,000, and we actually reached that goal, surprisingly. Well, the new plan goes beyond that. Now in 2022, we're looking at over 430, and in 2023, 447,000, and 2024, 451,000 people per year. Canada is welcoming with open arms, which would be equivalent to 1.14% of the population by 2024. We want to grow that fast. Open door policy. Well, everyone, even small cities around us, is wanting to take a piece of that immigration pie. I want to look, because we talked about certain areas that rose by 30% year over year. Well, guess what? We actually saw Bancroft, an area, rise by 48%, North Bay, 42%, Chilliwack, 41%, Brantford, 40%, Cambridge, 39%, and the list goes on, even Barrie, 38%. We have massive growth that happen even beyond the 30%. And these little places, they get a little excited. They salivate when they start to see the potential of immigration, maybe not directly to Bancroft, but you got people moving to Toronto and therefore flowing into Bancroft, and it's leading to an astonishing 48% growth year over year. But why? Well, in Bancroft's case, low prices for so long meant that builders weren't clamoring to build homes there. They say, it's not worth it with the building costs. We just might as well not build. So we end up with this severe shortfall in supply. Again, an illustration of where supply can really do damage as far as prices go. But here's what they say. This is the mayor. It really stunted new development because developers would come in and they look and say, your house prices are too low. We cannot build here because the gap between a new build and a resale is just too great. And that's led to these massive price growths. And so now, obviously, there's some catching up to do as far as price. Well, North Bay, they are going through this entire campaign. They want you to move there. North Bay, Ontario, that saw price growth of 42% year over year. Its mayor wants big city buyers, that's you, to keep coming. Even though prices shot up in North Bay, the mayor says it's still much more affordable than Toronto. To put it into perspective, they got this neighborhood there called Airport Hill, where you can buy a 3,500 to 4,000 square foot home for 600,000, where in Toronto you'd be paying $2.5 million. And then moving along, we see, who else we got here? This is actually very interesting. I'm going to read you like kind of the intro to this. This is from BlogTO. Imagine, if you will, weary downtown Toronto residents stepping out of a 4-bedroom house that you bought for less than $200,000 in a world where your hair can stay frizz-free for more than 5 minutes in June, July, and August. Such a place exists in Northern Ontario, according to said place's Economic Development Corporation. It goes by the name of Timmins, Ontario. So the article says, like Smooth Rock Falls, Owen Sound, London, and several other Ontario communities before it, Timmins is trying to woo Toronto workers away from their cramped, expensive urban lives in favor of a greener and dramatically cheaper pasture. This week, officials announced a new website called movetotimmins.ca, which is aimed to attract more people to live and work in the northeastern Ontario city. Come, we want a piece of the pie. Toronto can't address your housing needs. We can, right? All of this to say, Toronto will continue to lose residents and deter immigrants if they cannot step up and provide affordable housing options to residents. Small Ontario cities are shouting their praises with hopes immigrants are listening. It's like the Indian guy that loved karaoke. Get up to sing. Love it. Love it. So then we jump over to the supply. We look on the supply side. Today, in the ever-evolving battle of NIMBYs, the NIMBY warfare, the not in my backyard folks, we have a new contender. That's right. We have the YIMBYs, the yes in my backyard that is forming. Bilal Akhtar has witnessed the effects of Toronto's housing crisis firsthand. One by one, his friends were priced out of the market, forced to move across the country or even across the border to find a home. And that's one reason Akhtar became a member of More Neighbours Toronto, MNTO, a pro-housing volunteer-led organization advocating for more housing development across the city. He's one of more than 200 active volunteers in the self-described YIMBY collective. Here's what some of the things they do. They draft recommendations. They submit deputations to the city and attend public consultation meetings, all in an effort to push for more substantive housing development in the city. You've got that NIMBY yelling loud and proud to protect their neighborhood. Well, now you got the YIMBYs yelling just as loud, and they're actually making waves. They're having an impact in a lot of development. You can go ahead and we put all of our articles down below if you want to read more into that. But I find it interesting that there's this kind of battle that's forming, and now we have parties on both sides attending these meetings. Well, okay, so now we've got everybody yelling. We got prices going crazy. We need some solutions. We need some kind of way to figure this out. Well, the problem is that good ideas have been mostly ignored. We're talking about a vacant home tax and just other progressive ideas that we have seen worked. So this is coming from a Globe and Mail article. An indicator of vacant homes is on the rise in Toronto and on the decline in Vancouver, according to a new analysis of census data. We've got this imbalance. We see vacant homes disappearing in Vancouver, but rising in Toronto. The number of housing units not occupied by, quote, usual residents, defined as Canadians and permanent residents living in their usual place of residence, rose by a whopping 40% in the city of Toronto. Wow. Meanwhile, the level fell by 10% in the city of Vancouver over the same period. Now, they talked to Andy Yan, the director of Simon Fraser University Cities program. He's the one that kind of talked about this, but he found in his study the divergence between Toronto and Vancouver was striking and said it showed that Vancouver's empty homes tax, stricter Airbnb rental rules, and anti-real estate speculation measures are working to ensure fewer homes are sitting vacant. Meanwhile, we sit over here on our hands doing literally nothing. There's a reason that Toronto has ballooned in value, surpassing Vancouver as Canada's most expensive market. We talked about that the other day, just last week. But it shouldn't be that hard, right? Find your target and sink it, like pool. I love to go shoot pool with my friends on weekends. Swimmers don't like it that much, but it is what it is, fam. Meanwhile, the craziest idea has been approved. So we ignore these ideas that are definitely working in similar cities. And instead we jump to these massive decisions, approving them at the city level and hopefully not the provincial level. Then we're talking today about a home speculation tax. That's right. Talking about a star. This is an editorial, kind of getting into some details, but I thought it was very valuable for us to consider that this is on the table. My award, here's what they say. My award for the worst real estate idea of the year, possibly the decade, goes to Toronto City Council for approving a motion to push for a provincial tax to stop home speculation and home flipping. Councillor Mike Cole introduced the motion and it was approved by 21-4 vote by council last month. Cole is a former economics teacher who was in his 20s when the Bill Davis government introduced a 50% land speculation tax on April 9th, 1974. In the motion's preamble, Cole said the tax is credited with, quote, slowing the extreme increase in property values. So here's what they go on to say. That's a wild understatement. The Davis government's land speculation tax caused what was probably the worst market crash since the Great Depression of 1929. A new provincial land speculation tax would cause home prices to drop sharply as they did in 1974. It would also result in years of litigation, foreclosures, power sales, and bankruptcies as millions of Ontario homeowners could see their home equity wiped out. The damage to our society would be incalculable. This is coming from a lawyer that's getting a little more specific. So yes, the city approved it, but it doesn't sound like a good way to lead into a provincial election, Mr. Dougie, right? Instead, at the same time, we have a proposal being put forward to Mr. Ford. And here's what he says. So this is talking about the Ontario Housing Affordability Task Force. We kind of prepped you guys on what that would include. If you missed that episode, it's a couple weeks back now. But part of the recommendation was that Ontario needs, you probably heard this headline, $1.5 million homes in the next 10 years. But I want to get into some of the key details because I think that report can have some big impacts if any of these things are approved. The province's Housing Task Force has released 55 sweeping recommendations that, if implemented, would overhaul virtually every aspect of Ontario's housing system, from zoning and development charges to heritage designations and planning appeal rules. The proposals are aimed at ending the province's housing crisis by enabling the construction of 1.5 million homes in the next decade. We'll talk about why that's a ridiculous number as well. I like to get both angles. But here are some of the key details that highlight to me kind of the subtext that actually will have a big impact on us as investors. So the recommendations include putting an end to exclusionary zoning that shuts multifamily housing out of single-family residential neighborhoods, the NIMBYs, right? In about 70% of Toronto, pretty significant. The task force also proposes ending the height restrictions on skyscrapers immediately near transit stations if city zoning doesn't accommodate the province's density targets within 2 years. If you can't do it, all hell breaks loose. No limits on those heights. Municipal heritage designations would be prohibited once a development application has been filed for property, and municipalities would have to pay property owners for the loss of value if the property is designated. So if you're going to make it a heritage home, you better compensate me for that loss of value that I've gotten on a property because of the designation that you made, Mr. Government. Property taxes on purpose-built rental buildings, which can be 2.5 times higher, by the way, would be aligned with houses and condos to encourage investors to build more rental apartments. Sounds good for us in the investment in the multifamily apartment game. But among the other proposals is modernizing the Ontario Building Code and allowing for timber construction. Listen to this, for up to 12 stories. Right now it's sitting at 6 stories. Obviously, there's a massive cost benefit to doing that as well. Development charges and costs in lieu for parks would be waived for all residential infill homes up to 10 units or for any houses that doesn't require new infrastructure. Projects with a guarantee of affordability for 40 years would also be exempt from those charges. These are some massive recommendations. Even if any one of these categories are moved forward with, that's a tremendous opportunity for certain people, depending on what category you find yourself in. But how can they be in this task force so bold? Well, the report notes that Toronto's population density falls well below those of other global cities, with 450 people per square kilometer on average. So 450 in Toronto compared to 1,800 in London, or 1,700 in New York. If we're going to truly be a global city, we got a lot of catching up to do as far as the population and how many people are actually here. Maybe we can actually do this. It's nice to have specific recommendations now, right? We already know there's a housing crisis, but it's about time we get more details on how to fix it. Yes, the Holy Bible tells us to love one another, but the Kama Sutra is more specific. This is the Kama Sutra of all real estate plans. But then there are other parties, my friends over at Better Dwelling specifically, but there's others too. The Globe and Mail also has some stuff to say about this that say that's just simply impossible. 1.5 homes, 1.5 million, unrealistic. BMO, coming from BMO, Robert Capchi, she dumped a bucket of cold water on the plan. Not only does the bank say it doesn't make sense, they hint it sounds like Ontario's last real estate bubble. The plan doesn't even pretend to be feasible, which becomes apparent if you understand the scale. First, that it's roughly twice the size of already elevated, because Ontario, we set records for development. We're trying to double that. That's the goal we have to do over the next 10 years. It seems impossible. Ontario is delivering new homes at one of the fastest rates ever, and yet here we are proposing that in order to address the housing supply issue, we have to do double. Wow. Moving on to the Globe and Mail angle, the number of homes in Toronto has increased at a faster pace than the city's population over the past 5 years, according to new census data that provides a fresh look at the mismatch between housing supply and demand in the city. So we sit back and we say, you know what, population is growing. It is. But we also say supply needs to keep up. Well, now we have evidence that the number of homes in Toronto that are being built is actually growing faster than the city's overall population. Believe it or not, the number of private dwellings in Toronto rose by 7% between 2016 to 2021. Meanwhile, the area's population grew by 4.6% according to the census figures, which were released on Wednesday. So should it not be getting better? Meanwhile, we see double-digit price growth happening across the city. These new numbers call into question the often cited idea that a shortage of homes is a major reason the city's housing prices have soared to record highs. Maybe the supply issue is overdone, because we actually should be, technically, as far as the number of residents and the number of houses, in a better situation than we were in 2016. But that is absolutely not the case. Could it be that the cost of interest rates and the amount of demand factors that exist is maybe playing a role in all of this too? I think yes. Which I wanted to end off with just a brief discussion. I love to volunteer at our church. Actually, on Thursdays, we do a youth group. So I'm a youth leader there. And I have conversations with these young folks all the time. And a common question that I'm getting, whether that's from their parents or from themselves, is how am I ever going to afford a house? The quick and easy answer is you're not. But I don't like that answer. I'm not satisfied with that. Option number one would be that you can move away. Timmins, Ontario would have you believe that's the only option. But I do believe, to give encouragement to you guys out there, maybe some of you are listeners, I do believe you can do it, guys. I just think you need to have a more creative way of doing it. The reason that I'm confident you can do it is there are people who are doing this. When we look back 20 years ago, even when I first purchased my property, it seemed to be, it got a little harder, but the gist was just buy a house, get into the market and get going. The concepts of buying your primary residence, saving up, having a down payment, and a decent job to afford a house seems to be an impossible task now. Well, what if I were to tell you, and I can't get into too much on the show, but you can do it without those things, guys. There are options within real estate that if you are creative, you can absolutely get into the housing market. Maybe you're not buying a primary residence. Maybe you're buying an investment. Maybe you're doing it in a creative way. Maybe you're doing it through joint ventures or other, creative ways for you to raise capital for these ventures, if that's in fact the case. Or we could, there's just so many levels. We can have, if you don't have a mom and dad willing to lend you a bunch of money, maybe you joint venture with someone who's not your mom and dad, but has a financial interest in partnering with you. There's just so many beautiful and creative ways to do it, but they're not very well known. And it leaves a lot of young people feeling absolutely defeated. So this last part of the show, I just wanted to encourage you guys and hopefully encourage those of you who aren't in this kind of circle to encourage the next generation that there is a way to get into housing and into investment and to own real estate, which we so love here in Canada, especially those of you who follow our show. If you love real estate as much as I do, we should want that for the next generation, and don't let them feel like it's hopeless, because it's not. But the road is a lot longer and it's going to require a lot more creativity. The creativity of borrowing against your RSP to getting down payment is peanuts compared to the obstacles that young people face, but there is absolutely a way to overcome that. And obviously we teach some of those things on our show with our guests, but we have coaching, and I really do have a heart behind it. If you guys want to reach out, I'm accessible. I am here. My phone number is posted. My information is online. I am not that popular that I don't have time to chat it up with you guys if you ever want to reach out. But all that to say, happy belated Valentine's Day, everybody. I hope you took some time to show your love to those around you, right? Not just think about it. But Bradley, my wife did say that nothing would make her happier than diamond rings. I'll just buy her nothing. Be generous, dude. Be generous. There's nothing sexy about a telepathic gift either. Then again, it is the thought that counts. Hit the like button. You can share this on Instagram, but find out some more information on what we do at Watson Estates over on our link tree. Joint venture opportunities, off-market deals, coaching programs. But if you're following us on iTunes, I would ask, please, please, please leave a 5-star review. And I would really appreciate that. Leave us a 5-star rating and a review. It makes, if there's one way that you can get back to our show, that is the way it does it. It helps us grow organically and helps us stay at the top of the charts on iTunes as we continue to educate folks and investors just like you. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Take care and keep it real.